Marcus stood silently in the courtroom, enduring every cutting remark as his wife Jennifer and her mother mocked him relentlessly while signing the divorce papers. They sneered at his cheap suit, his modest job, his complete lack of ambition, unaware that he had inherited his father's billion-dollar empire just 3 days earlier. The paperwork sat unopened in his apartment. He'd planned to share the news with Jennifer that very week, to finally prove he could provide the life she'd always wanted. But when she served him divorce papers instead, calling him a pathetic failure in front of her mother, something inside him went cold. Now, as the judge revealed his fortune during the asset disclosure, reading aloud the staggering numbers that made Jennifer's face drain of color, Marcus realized his next move would be the one that crushed them completely. He leaned forward, signed his name with steady hands, and smiled for the first time in months. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I'd like to proceed with the original terms of the divorce. She gets nothing." Jennifer's mother gasped. Jennifer herself began to speak, then stopped, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as the truth hit her. She'd just mocked her way out of billions, and there was no going back. The cemetery stretched out in neat rows of granite and marble, each stone a testament to lives once lived. Daniel Reeves stood alone beside the fresh grave, his worn navy suit hanging loosely on his frame, the fabric shiny at the elbows from years of wear. The morning mist clung to the ground like a veil, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called out into the silence. His mother's headstone was simple, bearing only her name and dates, nothing that hinted at who she truly was or what she meant to him. He'd chosen simplicity because that's what she would have wanted, or at least that's what he told himself. The funeral had been small, attended by a handful of neighbors and regulars from his failing bookstore. Victoria, his wife of 5 years, hadn't come. She'd claimed a migraine, her voice tight and distant over the phone that morning, and he'd been too exhausted to argue. Grief sat heavy in his chest, making it difficult to breathe, and he found himself replaying memories of his mother like a worn film reel. She'd raised him alone after his father left, when Daniel was barely 3 years old, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and housed. He remembered her coming home late at night, exhausted but always finding the energy to ask about his day, to help with homework, to make him feel like the most important person in the world. She'd encouraged his love of books, supported his dream of opening a bookstore even when it seemed impractical, and never once complained about the sacrifices she made. Now she was gone, and the emptiness felt insurmountable. Daniel knelt down, placing his hand on the cold earth. The soil was still loose, not yet settled, and it seemed impossible that she was beneath it. He'd held her hand in those final days at the hospital, watching her slip away gradually, her body failing but her eyes still holding that familiar warmth. She'd tried to tell him something in those last moments, her voice barely a whisper, but he couldn't make out the words. He'd leaned closer, desperate to hear, but she'd simply squeezed his hand and closed her eyes. That squeeze haunted him now, the feeling that she'd been trying to communicate something important, something he'd missed. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring that tears had been falling steadily for the past hour. The city felt distant from here, muffled and unreal, and he wished he could stay in this bubble of grief forever, rather than return to the mess his life had become. The bookstore was drowning in debt, creditors calling daily with threats and ultimatums. Victoria had grown increasingly cold over the past year, their conversations reduced to logistics and complaints. His best friend Ryan, who'd been his constant companion since college, had started avoiding him, their weekly basketball games canceled with increasingly flimsy excuses. Daniel felt utterly alone, standing at this grave, mourning not just his mother but the life he'd somehow failed to build. He stayed until the groundskeeper approached, clearing his throat politely to indicate the cemetery would be closing soon. Daniel nodded, rising stiffly to his feet, his knees protesting from kneeling on the damp ground. He walked back to his car, a 15-year-old sedan with a rusted bumper and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. The drive home took 40 minutes through rush hour traffic, giving him too much time to think. His mother had lived in a modest apartment on the east side, the same one they'd shared throughout his childhood. He'd helped clear it out last week, boxing up her few possessions, surprised by how little she'd accumulated over the years. There'd been clothes, some books, kitchen items, and a small jewelry box containing his grandmother's wedding ring. Nothing of significant value, nothing that explained the quiet dignity with which she'd moved through the world. He'd found photo albums, though, filled with pictures of him at every age, carefully labeled and preserved. His first day of school, his high school graduation, the opening day of the bookstore, with him standing proudly in front of the window display. She'd been there for every moment, capturing them all, but there were no photos of her. No record of her own life beyond her role as his mother. When Daniel finally reached his apartment building, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that developers kept promising would gentrify, the sun was setting. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, dreading the emptiness that waited. The door was unlocked, which seemed odd, but he pushed it open and stopped cold. Suitcases were lined up in the hallway, packed and zipped. Victoria emerged from the bedroom, her expression carefully neutral, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She wore the dress she'd bought for what she called important occasions, deep emerald green that hugged her figure. She was beautiful, he thought distantly, wondering when he'd stop noticing. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice carried none of the warmth he'd fallen in love with years ago. Daniel set his keys on the small table by the door, his movements mechanical. "What's going on?" She crossed her arms, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I'm leaving. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but I waited until after the funeral." The words didn't quite register at first. He stared at her, trying to process, his grief-fogged mind struggling to shift gears. "Leaving?" Victoria nodded, her jaw tight. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. The struggling, the constant worry about money, your complete lack of ambition. I thought you'd turn things around, but you're still running that failing bookstore, still living in this dump, still going nowhere." Each word hit like a physical blow. "My mother just died," he said quietly. "I know, and I'm sorry about that, but it doesn't change anything. I need more than this. I deserve more than this." She gestured around the apartment, at the second-hand furniture, the peeling paint, the life they'd built together that she clearly found inadequate. Daniel felt something crack inside him, but he remained still, watching her as if she were a stranger. "Is there someone else?" Victoria hesitated, and that hesitation told him everything. "Ryan and I have grown close. He understands me in ways you never could. He has drive, ambition, a real career. We're going to build something together." Ryan, his best friend Ryan. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that Daniel almost laughed. Instead, he nodded slowly, his voice hollow. "How long?" "Does it matter?" she snapped. 6 months. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. And honestly, it's been the happiest I've felt in years. 6 months. While his mother was dying, while he was juggling creditors and struggling to keep the bookstore afloat, his wife and his best friend had been building a relationship behind his back. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Victoria picked up her phone from the counter. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I'll have papers drawn up. This doesn't have to be complicated. You have nothing, so there's nothing to fight over." The casual cruelty of that statement, the dismissal of their 5 years together, left him speechless. She grabbed the handle of the largest suitcase, pausing at the door. "I did care about you once, Daniel, but caring isn't enough. You're a dreamer who never wakes up, and I can't wait around for you to figure out that dreams don't pay bills." Then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway for a long time, staring at the space where she'd been. The apartment was exactly as it had been that morning, but everything felt different, hollowed out and cold. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the dusk. Somewhere out there, Victoria and Ryan were together, probably celebrating their freedom, their future. And here he was, alone with his grief and failure, his mother gone, and his marriage dissolved in the same week. He thought about calling someone, but who was there to call? His mother would have known what to say, would have held him and reminded him of his worth. but she was buried in that cemetery across town. He sank onto the couch, his worn suit still smelling faintly of earth and flowers, and let the darkness settle around him like a shroud. The bookstore had been his dream once. Daniel remembered the day he'd signed the lease, his mother beside him, her face glowing with pride. Pages and poetry occupied a corner space in a historic building downtown, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. He'd imagined it becoming a community hub, a place where people gathered not just to buy books, but to connect, to discuss ideas, to find refuge from the increasingly digital world. For the first year, it had almost worked. He'd hosted reading groups, author events, poetry slams on Friday nights that drew surprising crowds. His mother had helped him paint the walls a warm cream color, had sewn cushions for the reading nook, had baked cookies for the grand opening. But gradually the reality of competing with online retailers and chain stores had set in. Foot traffic dwindled, sales dropped, and the monthly rent became an increasingly impossible burden. Now, 5 years later, the store felt like a mausoleum for his failed ambitions. Daniel unlocked the front door, the bell above chiming weakly. Dust motes danced in the morning light streaming through the windows. The shelves were half empty, gaps where he'd been unable to restock popular titles. The reading nook's cushions were faded, and the coffee station he'd once maintained sat unused, the machine unplugged. He moved through the familiar space like a ghost, straightening books that didn't need straightening, wiping surfaces that were already clean. The store was supposed to open at 9, but some days he wondered why he bothered. Old Mrs. Patterson came by most mornings, more for company than books, and a handful of loyal customers still supported him, but it wasn't enough. The rent was 3 months overdue, and his landlord, a property management company that had recently acquired the building, had made it clear their patience was exhausted. He'd received another notice yesterday, certified mail warning of eviction proceedings. The bookstore was dying, and he didn't have the strength to save it. He was shelving returns when the bell chimed. Evelyn Torres walked in, a retired teacher who'd been shopping here since opening day. She was in her 70s with silver hair cut short and sharp, and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Daniel," she said warmly, approaching the counter with 2 books she'd special ordered weeks ago. "How are you holding up, dear?" The genuine concern in her voice nearly broke him. "Managing," he said, forcing a smile as he rang up her purchase. She studied him for a long moment, then reached across the counter to pat his hand. "Your mother was proud of you. She told me so every time she was here. Said you had integrity, that you cared more about doing right than getting rich." Daniel's throat tightened. "Fat lot of good that's done." Evelyn shook her head firmly. "Don't let the world make you cynical. Integrity matters even when it doesn't pay, especially when it doesn't pay." She paid in cash, counting out bills carefully from her worn purse, then added an extra 20. "For the coffee fund," she said, though they both knew there was no coffee fund anymore. After she left, Daniel stood holding that $20 bill, wondering if this was what his life had become. Charity from customers who pitied him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of emptiness. 2 browsers came in, took photos of books they'd later buy online, and left without purchasing. A teenager asked to use the bathroom, then departed without even glancing at the shelves. Daniel ate lunch at his desk in the back office. A peanut butter sandwich he'd made that morning, washing it down with tap water from the bathroom sink. His phone sat silent on the desk. No messages from Victoria, no missed calls from anyone. The loneliness was profound, a physical ache in his chest. He'd built this life carefully, thoughtfully, trying to do meaningful work, trying to contribute something positive to the world. And for what? To end up alone in a failing store, abandoned by everyone who'd claimed to care about him. He thought about his mother's final days, how she'd seemed worried about something, her eyes searching his face as if trying to memorize it. She'd mentioned paperwork once, said something about making sure everything was in order, but he'd assumed she meant her will, her end-of-life arrangements. She'd had a lawyer, someone she'd met with occasionally, but Daniel had never paid much attention. His mother had lived simply, worked as an administrative assistant at various companies throughout her life, and he'd assumed there was little to settle. At 6 o'clock, he locked up and returned to his apartment. Climbing those 3 flights of stairs with leaden feet, the empty space greeted him with indifference. Victoria had taken her things but left the furniture, probably because it wasn't worth moving. He heated a can of soup on the stove, ate it standing at the counter, then showered and collapsed into bed. Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of his mother reaching for him, trying to speak, her words lost in some vast distance he couldn't cross. He woke at 3 in the morning, sweat-soaked and disoriented, the apartment dark and cold around him. For a moment he forgot she was gone, forgot Victoria had left, forgot everything except the feeling that he was drowning slowly, sinking into some dark water with no bottom. He lay there staring at the ceiling until dawn crept through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gray. Another day was beginning, empty and purposeless, and he had no idea how to fill it. 3 days after the funeral, Daniel was sorting through mail at the bookstore when he found it. A cream-colored envelope with an embossed return address from Whitfield and Associates, attorneys at law. The weight of it felt unusual, the paper expensive. He opened it carefully, unfolding a letter typed on letterhead that radiated establishment and old money. "Dear Mr. Reeves," it began, "we regret to inform you of our client's passing, though we understand you are already aware. Your mother, Catherine Ann Reeves, retained our services for estate planning purposes. We request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss matters pertaining to her estate. Please contact our office to schedule an appointment. This matter requires your immediate attention." Daniel read it 3 times, confused. Estate? His mother had nothing to leave except those few possessions he'd already boxed up. Perhaps there was a small life insurance policy he didn't know about, something to cover final expenses. He called the number listed, and a receptionist with a crisp, professional voice scheduled him for the following afternoon. The address was in the financial district, a part of the city where glass towers stretched toward the sky and people in $1,000 suits moved with purpose and confidence. Daniel had no business there, but he'd go, if only to close this final chapter of his mother's life. The next day, he closed the store early, taking the subway downtown. He felt conspicuous in his worn suit, the same one he'd worn to the funeral, his only suit. The buildings around him seemed to judge him, their mirrored surfaces reflecting back his inadequacy. Whitfield and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of one of the newer towers, and when Daniel stepped off the elevator into their reception area, he felt like he'd entered another world. Everything was leather and mahogany, original artwork on the walls, a receptionist who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. She greeted him warmly, though, checking him in and offering coffee, which he declined. Within minutes, a man in his early 60s emerged from a hallway, extending his hand. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Thomas Whitfield. Thank you for coming. Please follow me." They walked through corridors lined with law books and into a spacious office overlooking the city. Whitfield gestured to a chair across from his massive desk, and Daniel sat, his hands folded in his lap, waiting. The lawyer settled into his chair, studying Daniel with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. "First," Whitfield began, "let me express my condolences. Your mother was a remarkable woman, and we were honored to represent her." Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. Whitfield continued, "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here. Your mother's affairs are more complex than you might imagine." He opened a folder, removing several documents. "Are you aware that your mother owned property?" Daniel frowned. "Just her apartment, right? She rented." "No, Mr. Reeves. She owned the building her apartment was in, along with 17 other residential and commercial properties throughout the city." The words didn't make sense. Daniel stared at the lawyer, waiting for the punchline, but Whitfield's expression remained serious. "I don't understand. My mother was an administrative assistant. She worked regular jobs, lived simply. There must be some mistake." Whitfield shook his head slowly. "There's no mistake. Your mother was an extremely private woman who went to great lengths to conceal her wealth. She also owned a portfolio of investments worth approximately $300 million, along with controlling interest in several private companies." The office seemed to tilt. Daniel gripped the arms of his chair, his heart pounding. "That's impossible. I assure you it's not." Whitfield slid a document across the desk. "This is a summary of her holdings. Everything now belongs to you, Mr. Reeves. You are the sole beneficiary of her estate. Daniel looked at the numbers on the page, but they might as well have been written in a foreign language. Millions, hundreds of millions, properties, stocks, bonds, business interests. His mother, who'd clipped coupons and bought day-old bread, who'd worked until her body gave out, was worth a fortune. How? He whispered. Whitfield leaned back in his chair. Your father, he said carefully, was not the person you were told about. Your mother met him when she was very young, and he was the heir to a manufacturing empire. They had a brief relationship, and when she became pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with either of you. His family paid her a substantial sum to disappear and never contact them again. Your mother took that money and invested it brilliantly. She had a gift for understanding markets, for seeing opportunities others missed. Over 30 years, she turned $2 million into what you see here. Daniel felt like he was falling. His entire life, everything he'd believed about who he was, where he came from, was a lie. His mother had let him struggle, had watched him scrape by, had never once mentioned any of this. Why didn't she tell me? Whitfield's expression softened. She left you a letter. She wanted me to give it to you after explaining the situation. He handed Daniel an envelope, this one in his mother's familiar handwriting. Daniel's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was several pages long, written in the careful script his mother had used for special occasions. My dearest Daniel, it began, and he had to stop, blinking back tears before continuing. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably angry with me. I don't blame you. I kept so much hidden, and you deserve to know why. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was 22 and terrified. Your father's family made it clear I was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved with money. They offered me $2 million to vanish, to never claim any connection to their family, to raise you without their name or support. I took it, not because I wanted money, but because I wanted you safe from people who saw us as liabilities. I invested that money carefully, and it grew beyond my wildest expectations. But here's what I learned, my darling boy. Wealth doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you happier. I watch people destroy themselves and others chasing money. Watch families torn apart by inheritance battles. Watch children ruined by knowing they'd never have to work for anything. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to develop character, integrity, work ethic, compassion. I wanted you to know the value of things, to understand struggle, to build empathy for others. So I hid my wealth and lived simply, raising you to be a good man rather than a rich one. I know you'll question every choice I made now. You'll wonder why I let you struggle with the bookstore, why I didn't help when things got hard. The truth is, I wanted you to learn perseverance, to understand that meaningful work matters more than profit. Your bookstore may not be successful by conventional standards, but you've created a space that matters to people like Evelyn Torres, like the kids who come for your poetry nights, like everyone who feels lost in this harsh world and finds comfort in your shelves. That has value beyond money. But I also know the world is cruel, and people will try to use you now. Trust Thomas Whitfield. He's been my advisor for 20 years and will help you navigate what comes next. Be wise, be generous, but protect yourself. Not everyone who claims to love you actually does. Build the life you want, Daniel, but build it on the foundation of character, not wealth. Make me proud by being kind, by helping others, by staying true to yourself. The money is yours to use as you see fit, but remember, it's a tool, not a purpose. Find purpose in making the world better, even in small ways. I love you more than you'll ever know. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person. Sorry I waited so long. Sorry for every moment you felt alone. You were never alone. I was always watching, always proud, always loving you completely. Your mother. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face, grief and shock and confusion swirling together. Whitfield waited patiently, offering a box of tissues. When Daniel finally looked up, the lawyer nodded. Take your time processing this. It's overwhelming, I know. But we'll need to make some decisions soon about how to manage these assets. Daniel wiped his eyes, his mind racing. He thought about Victoria mocking his lack of ambition, about Ryan stealing his wife while dismissing him as a failure, about the landlord threatening to evict him. None of them knew. None of them had any idea. And suddenly, clearly, Daniel decided they wouldn't know. Not yet. Not until he understood what he wanted to do with this information, with this wealth, with this second chance his mother had somehow given him from beyond the grave. "I need time," he said finally. "I need to think." Whitfield nodded. "Of course. But Mr. Reeves, one more thing. Your mother left specific instructions about certain situations. She was very perceptive about human nature. If certain people come back into your life once they learn about your inheritance, she left guidance for how to handle them. She predicted quite a lot, actually. Said she knew you'd been hurt recently, though she didn't give me details." His mother had known. Somehow, even dying, she'd known about Victoria, about Ryan, about all of it. Daniel stood, shaking Whitfield's hand, clutching his mother's letter like a lifeline. "I'll be in touch," he said, and walked out of that office into a world that looked exactly the same but felt completely different. He was rich, impossibly, absurdly rich, and no one knew. Daniel walked through the financial district in a daze, his mother's letter folded carefully in his jacket pocket against his chest. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between buildings, and the city hummed with rush-hour traffic, people flooding out of offices toward subway stations and parking garages. Everyone moved with purpose, with destination, while he drifted like a ghost among them. He found himself in a small park, really just a plaza with benches and a fountain, and sat down heavily. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile everything he just learned. $300 million. Properties, investments, businesses. His mother, who darned his socks when he was young because new ones seemed wasteful, who'd made soups from leftover vegetables to stretch their grocery budget, had been wealthy beyond measure and hidden it completely. The betrayal stung at first, sharp and accusatory. She'd let him struggle, watched him pour his savings into the bookstore, never mentioned she could have helped. But as he reread her letter slowly this time, really absorbing her words, he began to understand. She'd been teaching him, preparing him, giving him something no amount of money could buy. Character forged through adversity. He thought about Victoria's words, her contempt for his lack of ambition, her conviction that he was going nowhere. Just days ago, those words had cut deep because part of him feared they were true. He'd questioned himself constantly, wondered if he was a failure, if his dreams were just delusions. But now, sitting here with the weight of unexpected wealth pressing down on him, he realized something crucial. The bookstore mattered. Maybe not financially, maybe not by the world's measures, but it mattered to people like Evelyn Torres, who found community there, to the teenagers who discovered poetry at his Friday night slams, to the lonely and lost who'd found refuge among his shelves. His mother had understood that, had seen value in what he was building even when he couldn't see it himself. And Victoria, who'd mocked him for caring about things that didn't generate profit, had revealed herself completely. She hadn't left because he was poor. She'd left because she valued money over everything else, because she couldn't see worth beyond bank accounts and status symbols. Ryan, too, his supposed best friend, had demonstrated that their friendship meant nothing against opportunity. These people, Daniel realized with cold clarity, were exactly who his mother had warned him about. He pulled out his phone, staring at the screen. He could call Victoria right now, tell her everything, watch her realize what she'd given up. The thought was tempting, viscerally satisfying, but something stopped him. His mother had raised him better than that. Revenge might feel good momentarily, but it wouldn't change anything fundamental about who they were or who he wanted to be. Instead, he thought about Thomas Whitfield's words. His mother had left instructions for certain situations, had predicted people would circle back once they learned about his inheritance. She'd been so wise, so perceptive. Even in death, she was guiding him. Daniel made a decision then, sitting in that plaza with pigeons pecking at crumbs nearby. He would keep his inheritance secret. He would watch and observe, let Victoria and Ryan continue their lives, let the world keep seeing him as a failure. He would learn who people truly were when they had no reason to pretend, no incentive to be kind. Only then would he decide what to do with his newfound power. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel stood, his legs stiff from sitting, and began walking. He couldn't go back to the apartment, not yet. That space held too many ghosts, too many reminders of what he'd lost and what he'd gained in equal measure. Instead, he walked to a modest hotel in a neighborhood near the bookstore, a place that rented rooms by the week for not much money. The desk clerk barely looked at him as he paid cash for 3 nights, handing over a key to a small room on the second floor. It was clean but spare. A bed, a small table, a television that probably hadn't worked in years. Perfect. He needed this separation, this space to think without the weight of his old life pressing in. He lay on the bed staring at the water-stained ceiling and began planning. Tomorrow he would call Whitfield and arrange a private meeting away from the official offices. He needed to understand exactly what he'd inherited and what his options were. He needed to set up structures that would keep his wealth hidden while allowing him to make strategic decisions. His mother had mentioned trusts in her letter, ways to help others without revealing himself. He wanted to explore that, wanted to figure out how to use this money in ways that honored her values and his own. But he also needed to protect himself. Victoria had already filed for divorce, or would soon. He needed to ensure she got exactly what she deserved, which was nothing. Not out of spite, though God knew he felt spite, but because giving her money would validate her worldview, would confirm that wealth was all that mattered. Let her build her life with Ryan on their own merits. Let them struggle and scratch for everything, the way he'd been doing. Only then would they understand anything real. Daniel pulled out his phone and composed a careful email to Whitfield, requesting a meeting at the hotel tomorrow evening. Then he called the bookstore's voicemail and changed the message, saying he'd be closed for a few days due to personal matters. He knew that might cost him the few customers he had left, but he needed this time. Everything had changed in a matter of hours, and he needed to catch up, to plan, to prepare for what came next. He ordered pizza from a place down the street, eating it mechanically while watching the news on his phone. The world continued its chaos, oblivious to his personal upheaval. Somewhere in this city, Victoria and Ryan were probably together, maybe celebrating their freedom, their future. They had no idea that the man they dismissed so casually had just inherited a fortune that would make their ambitions look like pocket change. And they wouldn't know, not until Daniel decided it was time, if ever. Sleep came easier that night than it had since his mother's death. The hotel room's anonymity felt like armor, protecting him from expectations and judgments. He dreamed of his mother, but not the desperate, reaching dreams of before. This time she was sitting across from him at their old kitchen table, smiling that gentle smile he knew so well. She didn't speak, just looked at him with profound love and understanding, and he woke feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe not happiness, not yet, but the possibility of it somewhere down the road. He showered in the small bathroom, dressed in his worn clothes, and went downstairs to find coffee. The hotel had a small breakfast area, and he sat there with other transient souls, people passing through or stuck in life's waiting rooms. No one looked at him twice. He was invisible here, just another nobody trying to get by, and that invisibility felt like a gift. Whitfield called mid-morning, confirming he'd come to the hotel that evening. Daniel spent the day walking the city, really seeing it for the first time in months. He'd been so consumed by grief and failure that he'd stopped noticing the world around him. Now he watched people carefully, wondering about their lives, their struggles, their secrets. How many of them were like his mother, hiding wealth or poverty or pain behind carefully constructed facades? How many were like Victoria and Ryan, users and takers who saw others as resources to exploit? And how many were like Evelyn Torres, genuinely kind people trying to make the world slightly better despite getting nothing in return? He wanted to be like Evelyn, like his mother, like the person he'd been trying to be all along. But he also needed to be smart now, strategic, protected. The stakes had changed completely. That evening, Whitfield arrived carrying a briefcase, looking oddly out of place in the shabby hotel lobby. Daniel led him upstairs, and they spread documents across the small table. For 3 hours, the lawyer walked him through everything: the properties, the investments, the business holdings, the trusts his mother had already established for various charitable purposes. It was overwhelming, dizzying, but Whitfield was patient, explaining each element carefully. Your mother was very specific about maintaining privacy, Whitfield said. She set up multiple shell corporations and trusts to obscure ownership. She didn't want anyone knowing she had wealth because she believed it changed how people treated you, always wondering what they could get from you. Daniel understood that completely now. Can we maintain that structure? Keep everything hidden? Whitfield nodded. Absolutely. In fact, I recommend it, at least until you've had time to adjust. We can set up a discretionary fund you can access for daily expenses, make it look like you're just scraping by. Meanwhile, the larger assets continue appreciating, and you can make decisions about them when you're ready. They worked until midnight, Daniel signing papers that transferred official control to him while maintaining all the privacy protections. Whitfield explained about taxes, about legal obligations, about the quarterly meetings they'd need to have. It was exhausting and technical, but by the end, Daniel felt slightly more grounded. He had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. Stay in this hotel, maintain his appearance of poverty, close the bookstore as planned since he couldn't pay rent anyway. Let his old life collapse publicly while building something new privately. And watch carefully for the vultures his mother had warned about, the people who would suddenly care about him once they smelled money. The eviction notice came a week later, delivered to the bookstore in an official envelope from the property management company. Daniel stood in his empty store, holding the paper, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. This place had been his dream, his attempt to create something meaningful, but it had also been his chain, dragging him down into debt and despair. Now it would close, and everyone would see it as confirmation of his failure. Perfect. He had 3 days to vacate. The shelves would need to be cleared, the lease officially terminated, the final chapter of this particular story ended. He spent those days carefully packing books, sorting them into boxes for donation to schools and libraries. It felt like dismantling a life, which he supposed it was. Evelyn Torres came by on the second day, her face creased with concern when she saw him packing. "Oh, Daniel," she said softly, "I heard about the eviction. I'm so sorry." He managed to smile. "It's okay, Mrs. Torres. I couldn't keep up with rent anyway. Time to move on." She helped him pack for an hour, chatting about her grandchildren, about the books she'd discovered through his recommendations over the years. When she left, she hugged him tightly. "You're a good man, Daniel Reeves. Don't let this world convince you otherwise. Something better's waiting for you, I'm sure of it." Her faith in him, unearned and unconditional, made his throat tight. He thanked her and went back to packing. On the final day, several other regular customers came by, people who'd heard through the small network of book lovers that Pages and Poetry was closing. They bought books at a discount, thanked him for creating a space that mattered to them, shared stories about discoveries they'd made on his shelves. An elderly man named Walter, who'd been coming in every Tuesday for 3 years, shook his hand with tears in his eyes. "This place saved me after my wife died," Walter said. "Gave me somewhere to go, something to think about besides being alone. Thank you for that." Daniel realized, packing up the last boxes, that the bookstore hadn't been a failure at all. He might not have made money, might have drowned in debt, but he'd created something that touched people's lives in ways that mattered. His mother had been right about that, about the value of meaningful work, regardless of profit. He took one last look at the empty space, at the shelves his mother had helped him paint, at the reading nook where countless people had lost themselves in stories, and felt at peace. This chapter was closing, but it hadn't been wasted. He was locking the door for the final time when his phone buzzed. A text from Victoria, her first communication since leaving. "Hey, heard about the store. I'm sorry, I know you cared about it. Ryan and I are having a small dinner party next weekend, just a few friends. Would you want to come? No hard feelings. Let's be adults about this." Daniel stared at the message, reading between the lines. No hard feelings meant she felt guilty or wanted to appear magnanimous, or both. A dinner party meant they wanted to show off whatever life they were building together, and inviting him meant they wanted to rub his face in their success while feeling charitable about it. His first instinct was to decline immediately, to block her number and move on. But then he thought about his mother's letter, about watching and observing, about letting people reveal themselves. Maybe this dinner party would be instructive. Maybe seeing Victoria and Ryan in their element would help him understand exactly who they were and what they valued. He texted back, "Sure, send me the details." Her response came quickly. "Great, next Saturday, 7 p.m., Ryan's new place in the Heights. Business casual. Looking forward to it." Business casual. Ryan's new place in the Heights, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. They were already climbing, already establishing themselves in a world where Daniel supposedly didn't belong. This would be interesting. He spent the next week in his hotel room, meeting occasionally with Whitfield to finalize various arrangements. The lawyer had set up a trust that provided Daniel with a modest monthly stipend, enough to cover the hotel and basic expenses while maintaining his appearance of poverty. The larger assets remained untouched, growing quietly in the background. Whitfield also showed him documentation about his mother's charitable work, trusts she'd established for scholarships, medical research, community programs. She'd been giving away millions for years, helping people who never knew where the money came from. "Your mother called herself a stealth philanthropist," Whitfield explained. "She believed the best charity was invisible, help given without expectation of recognition or gratitude. She thought public philanthropy often became about ego rather than impact." Daniel was learning more about his mother every day, understanding her complexity in ways he never had while she was alive. She'd been extraordinary, truly extraordinary, and she'd hidden it all to teach him humility. The lesson was working, though not in ways she could have predicted. He felt humble, certainly, but also strategic, calculating, preparing for something he couldn't quite name yet. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the city look tired. Daniel dressed carefully in his worn suit, the fabric now practically threadbare at the cuffs. He took the subway to the Heights, watching the neighborhoods improve gradually as he traveled north. Ryan's building was new construction, all glass and steel, with a doorman who looked him over skeptically before checking the guest list and allowing him up. The elevator was mirrored, and Daniel studied his reflection. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to look like. A failure, a man beaten down by life, someone to pity and dismiss. Perfect. Ryan's apartment was on the 15th floor, and when the elevator doors opened, Daniel could hear party sounds. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. He knocked and Ryan answered, his face arranging itself into an expression of sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel, man, come in, come in. So glad you could make it." Ryan looked good, Daniel noticed. Expensive haircut, fitted shirt that probably cost more than Daniel's entire outfit. Watch that glinted gold at his wrist. He'd clearly invested in his appearance, projecting success. They'd been friends since college, roommates for 2 years, best man at each other's weddings. Or at least Daniel had been Ryan's best man. He and Victoria had eloped, a small ceremony she'd insisted on because weddings were wasteful displays. He wondered now if she'd just been embarrassed by him even then. Ryan led him through a spacious entryway into an open-concept living area that was aggressively modern. White furniture, abstract art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A dozen people milled around, all dressed in that casual, expensive way that screamed money. Victoria stood near the kitchen, wearing a dress that must have cost a month's rent. Her hair done professionally. She saw him and smiled, that familiar smile he'd once loved, now just a performance. "Daniel," she said, approaching with a wine glass in hand, "I'm so happy you came. Can I get you something to drink?" Her mother appeared from nowhere, a woman Daniel had always found cold and judgmental. She looked him over with barely concealed disdain. "Daniel, I heard about your little store closing. Such a shame, but perhaps it's for the best. Time to find something more practical, don't you think?" The condescension was breathtaking. Daniel accepted a beer from Ryan, sipping it while Victoria's mother continued. "Ryan was just telling us about his promotion at the firm. Making junior partner at 32, quite impressive. Of course, he always had such drive, such ambition." The implication was clear. "Unlike you." Daniel smiled blandly. "That's great, Ryan. Congratulations." The evening proceeded as a carefully orchestrated display of success. Ryan talked loudly about deals he was closing, about the bonus he was expecting, about their plans to buy a vacation home in the mountains. Victoria played the perfect hostess, touching Ryan's arm possessively, laughing at his jokes, introducing Daniel to other guests as, "My ex-husband. We're staying friendly for everyone's sake." Each introduction was a small humiliation. These strangers looking at Daniel with pity or contempt, clearly wondering why Victoria had ever settled for someone so obviously beneath her. He played his part well, quiet and unassuming, letting them feel superior. Dinner was catered, some fusion cuisine Daniel couldn't identify, served on expensive plates at a table that probably cost more than his car. He sat between two women who worked in finance, and they talked across him as if he weren't there, discussing market trends and investment strategies. Victoria's mother, seated across from him, kept making little comments designed to hurt. "So Daniel, what are your plans now? Surely you're not too proud to get a real job?" He chewed slowly, swallowed. "I'm figuring things out," she sniffed. "Well, at your age, time is running out." Victoria made the right choice, moving on. Sometimes we outgrow people, and there's no shame in admitting it. Ryan squeezed Victoria's hand across the table. "We're just really happy, you know? Finally found the right person, the right connection. No offense, Daniel. But sometimes things just work better with different people." No offense. As if that phrase could erase the betrayal, the months of sneaking around, the fundamental violation of trust. Daniel smiled tightly. None taken. The evening dragged on, each moment another small cut, another demonstration of where he supposedly belonged in their hierarchy. He was the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when you lacked ambition, when you chased dreams instead of dollars. And he sat there, absorbing it all, remembering every word, every sneer, every condescending smile. Around 10, after dessert, Daniel excused himself to use the bathroom. He walked down the hallway, noting the expensive fixtures, the art that was probably original, the life Ryan and Victoria were building on the foundation of their mutual ambition and his betrayal. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else. Patience. His mother had taught him patience, taught him to play the long game, and that's exactly what he'd do. When he returned to the living room, Victoria pulled him aside. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I know this must be hard for you, seeing us happy like this. But I really do hope you find your path, Daniel. You deserve to be happy too, even if it's in a different way than us." The false kindness was almost worse than her mother's open disdain. Victoria actually believed she was being generous, including him in their celebration, offering him scraps of compassion from her position of superiority. He nodded. "I appreciate that." As he was leaving, Ryan walked him to the elevator. "Look, man, I know things are tough right now, but this is just how life goes sometimes. Some people are meant for different levels, you know? Nothing personal, just reality. If you ever need a reference or something, let me know. I still care about you, bro." Bro. Daniel stepped into the elevator, turning to face Ryan. "Thanks for the offer. I'll keep it in mind." The doors closed on Ryan's satisfied smile, and Daniel rode down alone. He walked out into the drizzle, letting the rain cool his face, and felt something clarify inside him. He'd needed to see this, needed to understand completely who these people were. They weren't just selfish, they were cruel. They weren't just ambitious, they were contemptuous of anyone who didn't share their values. And they genuinely believed they were better than him. Not just more successful, but morally superior because they'd chosen money over meaning. He pulled out his phone and called Whitfield. "I need to accelerate some plans," he said. "Let's meet tomorrow." The next morning, Daniel sat across from Whitfield in a private dining room at a restaurant far from his usual haunts. The lawyer had brought several folders, laying them out carefully. "Your mother," Whitfield began, "anticipated something like this. She suspected that people who'd hurt you would come back once they sensed opportunity. She left specific instructions for how to handle it, which she called teaching moments. She believed people should understand the consequences of their choices." Daniel leaned forward. "Tell me everything." Whitfield opened the first folder. Your mother owned the building where your bookstore was located. She bought it 5 years ago, shortly after you signed your lease, through one of her shell corporations. The property management company you've been dealing with works for her, or rather, for you now. The information took a moment to process. She owned my building. She wanted you to build something on your own merit without her help, but she also wanted to ensure you wouldn't be exploited. She paid your rent to herself, essentially, and the money went into an investment account in your name. The eviction was unfortunate. The management company didn't realize you were the actual owner's son. We can reverse that immediately if you'd like. Daniel shook his head slowly, stunned by his mother's foresight. What else? She purchased several other properties strategically, including the building where your friend Ryan has his apartment. Daniel's eyes widened. I own Ryan's building. You do, along with 15 others. Your mother had a gift for predicting development patterns. She bought in neighborhoods before they gentrified, and now those properties are worth substantial amounts. But more relevant to your current situation, she left instructions about certain people in your life. She didn't name them specifically, but she described types of people. Users, as she called them. People who valued you only for what you could provide. She suggested, when dealing with such people, that you observe them carefully, let them reveal their true nature, and then make informed decisions about their place in your life. Whitfield pulled out another document. There's a trust called the Restoration Fund that your mother established for helping people who'd been hurt by others' greed or ambition. She wanted you to use it as you saw fit, particularly for causes that mattered to you personally. She mentioned bookstores specifically, independent businesses that served communities rather than shareholders. A plan was forming in Daniel's mind, still vague but gaining shape. Tell me about the foundation work she was doing. For the next hour, Whitfield walked him through decades of his mother's stealth philanthropy. She'd funded scholarships for underprivileged kids, paid medical bills for families facing bankruptcy, supported community centers and libraries and arts programs, all anonymously, all carefully structured, so recipients never knew where the help came from. She'd built an entire infrastructure for invisible kindness, and now it belonged to Daniel. There's one more thing, Whitfield said, pulling out a small envelope. Your mother left this to be opened when what she called the vulture's notice. She predicted that certain people would try to reconnect with you once they suspected you had resources. When that happens, she wanted you to read this. Daniel took the envelope, feeling his mother's presence in the weight of it. How did she know so much about people? Whitfield smiled sadly. Your father's family taught her. When they paid her off, they made it clear she was worthless, just a problem to be eliminated with money. She learned how wealth changed people, how it made them see others as transactions rather than humans. She studied it, actually, took courses in psychology and economics, read extensively about power and corruption. She wanted to understand the disease so she wouldn't catch it herself, and so she could teach you to avoid it too. They talked about strategies for the next phase. Daniel would continue living modestly, maintaining his appearance of poverty. But behind the scenes, he'd start implementing his mother's vision, using the Restoration Fund to help people and businesses that mattered. The bookstore could reopen, but differently, as a community space supported by the fund. And when Victoria and Ryan inevitably came sniffing around, sensing something had changed, he'd be ready. Daniel spent the next week in quiet preparation. He met with accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors who'd worked with his mother, learning the mechanics of managing substantial wealth. It was overwhelming but fascinating, understanding the systems his mother had built. He also began reaching out to contacts from the bookstore, people who'd expressed interest in community literary programs. He didn't reveal anything about his resources, just asked questions, gathered information, planted seeds. He was learning patience, his mother's most important lesson. One evening, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Reeves, my name is Marcus Webb. I was a friend of your mother's, though we never met. I just learned of her passing, and I wanted to express my condolences. She was an extraordinary woman. They talked for 20 minutes, Webb sharing stories about how Daniel's mother had helped him years ago when his small tech startup was failing. An anonymous investor had provided crucial funding. asking for nothing in return. Only later, through his own detective work, had he discovered that investor was Catherine Reeves. "She changed my life," Webb said. "My company is worth billions now, and it never would have existed without her belief in me. I never got to thank her properly. Is there anything I can do to honor her memory?" Daniel thought carefully. "Actually, there might be. Can we meet?" The following week, Daniel sat in a conference room with Marcus Webb, who'd flown in from Silicon Valley for this meeting. Webb was in his 50s, casually dressed but radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd built something significant. They talked about Catherine Reeves, about her philosophy of invisible help, about her belief that the best philanthropy served others' dignity rather than donors' egos. Webb listened intently, nodding. "I've tried to pay forward what she did for me," Webb said, "but I'd like to do more, something that specifically honors her approach." "What did you have in mind?" Daniel laid out his vision for the bookstore, not just reopening it, but expanding the concept. A community hub offering free literacy programs, author support, space for local artists, all sustained by the Restoration Fund. Webb's eyes lit up. "I love it. But here's an idea. What if we thought bigger? What if we created a network of such spaces in underserved neighborhoods? I could contribute resources, help with technology infrastructure, maybe develop an app that connects these community centers. We could call it the Catherine Reeves Memorial Project." They talked for hours, excitement building. This was what his mother had wanted, Daniel realized. Not just wealth sitting in accounts, but resources actively making the world better in concrete ways. Webb committed to partnering with the Restoration Fund, bringing both money and expertise. As they shook hands, Webb said something that stuck with Daniel. "Your mother saw potential in people when no one else did. She bet on character over credentials. That's rare, and it's worth preserving." Daniel thought about Victoria and Ryan, about people who bet on credentials over character, who measured worth by bank accounts and titles. His mother had been the opposite, seeing value in what people built and how they treated others. He wanted to honor that. That evening, walking back to his hotel, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Hey man, been thinking about you. Coffee this week. Want to catch up properly." It was starting. They'd sensed something, some shift in the wind. Maybe someone had mentioned his meetings with lawyers, or perhaps they'd simply decided it was time to ensure he wasn't going to cause problems with the divorce. Either way, the vultures were noticing, just as his mother had predicted. Daniel opened the envelope Whitfield had given him, the one marked "When the Vultures Notice." His mother's handwriting filled a single page. "My darling boy, if you're reading this, then people who hurt you are circling back. They've sensed something, or they want something, or they're feeling guilty and seeking absolution. You owe them nothing, not your time, not your forgiveness, not your resources. They made their choices when they thought you had nothing to offer. Their return now is not about you. It's about them and what they think they can get. You have two options. Ignore them completely or engage strategically to teach them about consequences. I leave that choice to you. But remember this, kindness should flow toward those who need it, not those who exploit it. Save your generosity for people who value you rather than what you can provide. And Daniel, my sweet boy, don't let their return make you bitter. You are good because you choose goodness, not because it was always rewarded. Stay good, but be wise about where you place that goodness. Some soil grows flowers, some just breeds weeds. Learn the difference. I love you eternally, Mom." Daniel read it 3 times, then carefully folded it back into the envelope. His mother was right, as always. The vultures were circling, and he needed to decide how to handle them. He could ignore them, block their numbers, move on with his life, or he could engage strategically, let them reveal themselves completely, and ensure they understood exactly what they'd lost. He thought about the dinner party, about Victoria's false kindness and Ryan's condescension, about Victoria's mother's open contempt. They'd enjoyed humiliating him, had felt superior in their cruelty. And now they were reaching out, sensing something had changed, wanting to position themselves advantageously. The decision crystallized. He would engage, but on his terms. He would watch them scramble and scheme, would let them expose their motivations completely, And then, when the moment was right, they would learn that choices have consequences. He texted Ryan back, "Sure. Thursday work? Know a place near my hotel?" The game was beginning, and this time Daniel held all the cards. The coffee shop was deliberately chosen, a rundown place in Daniel's neighborhood where the furniture didn't match and the coffee came in chipped mugs. He wanted Ryan on his territory, in a space that reinforced his apparent poverty. Ryan arrived 10 minutes late, looking around skeptically as if worried about contamination. He spotted Daniel in the corner booth and approached, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Hey man, thanks for meeting." They ordered. Daniel got black coffee. Ryan asked for something complicated that the barista clearly didn't know how to make, and settled into awkward conversation. Ryan talked about work, about how demanding junior partnership was, but how rewarding, about the deals he was closing. He mentioned Victoria casually, how happy they were, how everything had just clicked into place. "I know it was weird, the timing and everything," Ryan said, stirring sugar into his disappointing latte. "But when you know, right? Life's too short to deny real connections." Daniel sipped his coffee, letting Ryan fill the silence. The nervous energy was palpable. Ryan clearly working towards something, but taking his time getting there. Finally, after 20 minutes of preamble, Ryan shifted gears. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the divorce. I know Victoria already filed, but I wanted to make sure you're okay with everything. No hard feelings on our end, and we want this to be smooth for everyone." "Okay with everything?" Daniel kept his voice neutral. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, like, we're not trying to be difficult or anything. Victoria mentioned you might have some residual assets or whatever, maybe from your mom's stuff. We just want to make sure everything's divided fairly, legally speaking. Clean break, everyone moves on, happy." There it was. They'd heard something, sensed something, and now they were fishing. Daniel wondered who tipped them off, or if it was just instinct. Predator's intuition sensing prey might not be as helpless as assumed. "My mother didn't leave much," Daniel said carefully. "Some personal items, small life insurance policy. Nothing significant." Ryan's relief was visible. "Oh, okay, good. I mean, not good that she didn't leave much, but good that it's simple, because Victoria's lawyer was asking questions, and we didn't want any complications." They talked for another few minutes, Ryan's agenda clearly complete. As they were leaving, Ryan clapped him on the shoulder. "Look, I know things are tough right now, but you'll bounce back. You're a survivor, man. And hey, if you ever need advice or connections or whatever, I'm here. We're still friends, despite everything." Friends. Daniel watched Ryan walk away toward his expensive car parked illegally at a hydrant. Friends who stole wives and then pretended to care, who measured relationships by utility and discarded people when they seemed useless. His mother had understood this type of person completely, had warned him about exactly this scenario. Daniel pulled out his phone and called Whitfield. "They're fishing," he said. "Time to set some hooks." Over the next week, Daniel carefully planted information through channels that would reach Victoria and Ryan. He let slip to a mutual acquaintance that he'd been meeting with lawyers about his mother's estate. He mentioned to another friend, someone he knew gossiped, that there were some complicated financial matters being resolved. Nothing concrete, just enough to make them curious, to make them wonder if they'd miscalculated. The reaction was swift. Victoria called directly, her voice honey-sweet. "Daniel, hi. I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? Really, honestly?" They talked for a few minutes, Victoria expressing concern about his well-being, his housing situation, his plans. Then casually, she mentioned hearing he'd been dealing with estate matters. "I hope everything's okay. If you need help with anything, any paperwork or decisions, I'm happy to look at it. I did work in estate law for a year, remember?" Of course she did. She was positioning herself as helpful, essential, someone he should keep close. Daniel played along, mentioning that things were complicated, that he was trying to understand everything his mother had set up. Victoria pounced on that. "Set up? What do you mean?" "Oh, just some accounts and things. The lawyer's helping me sort through it all." He could practically hear her mind racing. "Well, you should be careful with lawyers, Daniel. They'll bill you forever if you let them. Maybe Ryan and I could help." We could take a look at the documents, make sure you're not being taken advantage of. The concern was touching, really. After abandoning him, after mocking his poverty, after building a life on his exclusion, now she wanted to help. Daniel thanked her politely and said he'd think about it. After hanging up, he sat in his hotel room and laughed, a sound he barely recognized from his own throat. Whitfield had advised him on the next phase. "Your mother left another letter," the lawyer had explained. "This one's labeled, 'When They Swarm.' She predicted they'd try to insert themselves into your financial affairs, to position themselves as helpers or advisors. She had very specific suggestions for how to handle that." Daniel had read the letter, marveling at his mother's psychological acuity. She'd mapped out this exact scenario, understanding that people who'd valued him at zero would suddenly inflate his worth once money entered the equation. Her advice was clear. Let them compete, let them scramble, let them reveal exactly how far they'd go to access resources. Then when their character was fully exposed, cut them off completely. It was masterful, and Daniel committed to following her playbook exactly. The next move came from Victoria's mother, surprisingly. She called from Victoria's phone, her voice dripping with the same contempt as before, but poorly disguised now with false warmth. "Daniel, dear, I wanted to apologize for my rudeness at the dinner party. I was going through some personal stress, and I took it out on you inappropriately. Can you forgive me?" Daniel assured her there was nothing to forgive. Knowing that her sudden change of heart meant they were desperate for information, she continued. "Victoria mentioned you're dealing with some estate matters. It's so complicated, isn't it? My late husband left me in a similar situation years ago. I'd be happy to share my experience, maybe help you navigate the complexities." Everyone suddenly wanted to help, to guide him, to ensure he made the right decisions. Daniel thanked her and said he'd consider it. That evening, he met with Whitfield and Marcus Webb to discuss the next phase of their plans. The Catherine Reeves Memorial Project was taking shape, with Webb contributing both funding and strategic guidance. They'd identified 5 neighborhoods where independent bookstores had recently closed, victims of rising rents and corporate competition. The project would acquire buildings in those areas, subsidize rents for community-focused businesses, and create sustainable cultural spaces. It was exactly what his mother would have wanted. Practical kindness that served real needs without demanding gratitude or recognition. "There's one property I'd like to prioritize," Daniel said, "the building where my bookstore was located. I'd like to buy it outright and renovate it completely. Turn it into the flagship location for this project." Webb nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect. That's your anchor, your proof of concept. Pour resources into making it spectacular, a genuine community asset. Then we replicate the model." Whitfield added, "The property is already yours technically. We just need to transfer it from your mother's trust to your direct ownership. That will make it public record that you own the building, which might accelerate certain people's interest in reconciling with you." That was exactly what Daniel wanted. Let them see that he wasn't the failure they'd assumed, that he had resources they'd dismissed. Let them scramble and scheme and reveal themselves completely. Then he'd make his final moves. Over the next 2 weeks, the renovation began. Daniel hired contractors, designers, and community organizers. The old bookstore space was gutted and reimagined, expanding into adjacent units he now owned. It would have a proper bookstore with carefully curated inventory, a performance space for readings and music, a community teaching kitchen, rooms for tutoring and classes. It would be beautiful and functional, a genuine gift to the neighborhood. He made sure word spread about the project, letting people know that Pages and Poetry would reopen better than before. The news reached Victoria and Ryan quickly. Ryan called, his voice pitched with forced casualness. "Hey, heard about your bookstore project. That's awesome, man. Didn't realize you had investment backing. Who's funding it?" Daniel kept his answer vague. "Some people who believe in the mission. It's coming together." "That's great, really great. Listen, Victoria and I would love to be involved somehow. Maybe investor roles. We could contribute capital, help with business planning. I've got experience with commercial real estate now. Could be really useful." The naked opportunism was breathtaking. Daniel thanked him for the offer and said he'd be in touch if needed. That same day, Victoria texted, "I'm so proud of you for not giving up on your dream. The new bookstore sounds amazing. Can we meet and talk about it? I'd love to hear all your plans. They met at a cafe near the construction site. Victoria arrived dressed impeccably, her enthusiasm almost convincing. She asked detailed questions about the project, about funding sources, about his role. Daniel shared selectively, watching her calculate, watching her try to assess his actual financial position. This is wonderful, Daniel, she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I'm sorry I didn't see your vision before. I was so focused on conventional success that I missed what really matters. You were right all along about meaningful work being more important than profit. The apology was artful, positioning her previous cruelty as mere blindness rather than character flaw. Daniel smiled, extracting his hand gently. Thank you. I appreciate that. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes earnest. I've been thinking a lot about us, about our marriage. I made a mistake, Daniel. I was scared and foolish, and I threw away something real for something superficial. Ryan's fine, but he's not you. He doesn't have your depth, your integrity. I miss that. Here it was, the play he'd been expecting. She was hedging her bets, positioning for reconciliation now that he appeared to have resources worth accessing. Daniel kept his expression neutral, his voice kind. That's a complicated thing to say, Victoria. You're with Ryan now. But we're not married yet, she said quickly. We've been talking about it, but nothing's decided. And seeing you now, seeing you building something real, it makes me remember why I fell in love with you in the first place. Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we should slow down and reconsider things. The audacity was impressive. She wanted to keep both options open. Ryan as backup if Daniel turned out to be another broke dreamer. Daniel as primary if he proved to have actual wealth. The calculation was so transparent, so utterly devoid of genuine feeling, that Daniel felt almost sorry for her. Almost. I think you should follow your heart, he said gently. Whatever that tells you is right. Victoria smiled, clearly interpreting his response as an opening. My heart says I made a huge mistake. Can we spend more time together? Rebuild what we lost? Daniel stood, placing money on the table for his coffee. Let me think about it. There's a lot to consider. As he walked away, he felt Victoria's eyes on his back, watching, calculating, hoping. His mother had warned him about this exact moment, about people returning when they sensed opportunity. She'd written in one of her letters, the saddest part isn't that they hurt you, it's that they'd hurt you again, exactly the same way, if given the chance. They haven't changed, only their assessment of your utility has changed. Remember that. Daniel remembered. He remembered everything. And soon, very soon, they'd understand that actions have consequences that money can't erase. The grand reopening of Pages in Poetry was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late spring. The renovation had transformed the space into something spectacular while maintaining its essential character. The exposed brick walls were cleaned and restored. The high ceilings now featured beautiful lighting that made the space warm and inviting. Shelves built from reclaimed wood lined the walls, filled with carefully curated books. The performance space had a small stage and sound system. The community kitchen gleamed with new equipment. It was exactly what Daniel had envisioned, a space that honored books and people equally. Invitations had gone out to the community, to the old customers who'd supported him before, to local artists and writers. Marcus Webb was flying in for the event, along with several other people his mother had helped over the years. Whitfield had tracked down some of them, people who'd benefited from Catherine Reeves' invisible philanthropy, and Daniel had reached out to invite them. He wanted his mother honored properly, wanted people to understand the legacy she'd built in secret. Victoria and Ryan had, of course, heard about the reopening. They'd been circling closer, making increasingly transparent attempts to reinsert themselves into Daniel's life. Victoria had called multiple times, suggesting they spend time together, rebuild their connection. Ryan had offered business advice, networking opportunities, capital if needed. Daniel had been politely non-committal to everything, letting them exhaust themselves with effort. The morning of the reopening, Daniel stood in the finished space, overwhelmed by what had been accomplished. Evelyn Torres arrived early, tears streaming down her face as she walked through the rooms. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, "your mother would be so proud. This is magnificent." Other early arrivals echoed her sentiment. People from the neighborhood who remembered the original store and marveled at its transformation. A local journalist came to cover the story, interviewing Daniel about his vision. He spoke carefully, talking about community and literacy and the importance of physical spaces in an increasingly digital world. He didn't mention his funding sources, didn't reveal anything about his actual resources. As far as anyone knew, he'd secured grants and attracted investors who believed in the mission, which was technically true. The evening event began at 7. People flooded in, filling the space with conversation and laughter. Local musicians performed, poets read original work, the community kitchen offered food prepared by neighborhood volunteers. It was everything Daniel had hoped for, a celebration of culture and connection. Marcus Webb arrived around 8, and Daniel greeted him warmly. They'd become genuine friends over the past months, bonded by their shared respect for Catherine Reeves and their commitment to her philosophy. Webb looked around the space with approval. "Your mother would love this," he said. "This is her vision realized." Victoria and Ryan arrived shortly after, dressed as if attending a gallery opening. They'd clearly coordinated outfits, projecting sophisticated success. Victoria's smile when she saw Daniel was brilliant, calculated to convey warmth and nostalgia. "Daniel, this is incredible. You've done something truly special here." Ryan clapped him on the back, his grip just slightly too firm. "Seriously impressive, man. You've come a long way. I'm proud of you." They mingled through the crowd, and Daniel watched them networking, collecting business cards, positioning themselves as his close friends and supporters. Several people who didn't know the history assumed they were involved with the project, and neither Victoria nor Ryan corrected them. It was masterful social climbing, attaching themselves to something successful, rewriting their relationship to him in real time. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus Webb approached the small stage. Daniel had asked him to say a few words to share his story about Catherine Reeves. The crowd quieted as Webb began speaking. "I'm here tonight to honor a woman most of you never met," Webb started. "Catherine Ann Reeves was, without exaggeration, one of the most extraordinary people I've ever known. 20 years ago, when I was nobody, when my startup was failing and I was days from bankruptcy, an anonymous investor saved me. The investment came through a shell corporation with no name attached, no demands made, no credit claimed, just capital when I desperately needed it, given because someone believed I was building something worthwhile." The room was silent, everyone listening. Webb continued, "It took me years to discover that investor was Catherine Reeves. When I finally tracked her down and tried to thank her, she asked me never to mention it publicly. She said the help wasn't about her. It was about me having a chance to build something meaningful. She said that's what money should do, create opportunities rather than obligations." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Webb's voice carried emotion now. "Catherine helped dozens of people this way, maybe hundreds. She gave scholarships, paid medical bills, saved businesses, supported artists, all invisibly, all asking nothing in return. She believed the best charity was the kind that preserved dignity, that helped people without making them feel small or indebted. And she taught her son these same values." Webb turned toward Daniel. "Your mother was adamant that you learn integrity before you learned about wealth. She wanted you to develop character independent of resources, to understand that worth comes from choices rather than bank accounts. She succeeded. The man standing here tonight, who built this beautiful space, who chose meaningful work over easy profit, who stayed true to his values even when they cost him everything, that's Catherine Reeves's real legacy. Not the money she accumulated, but the son she raised." The room erupted in applause. Daniel wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. Webb stepped down from the stage, and several other people approached Daniel to share their own stories about his mother. A woman who'd received a scholarship for medical school. A family whose home had been saved from foreclosure by an anonymous benefactor. A community center director whose programming had been funded by a mysterious grant. One by one, they revealed themselves, thanking Daniel for his mother's invisible kindness. Each story added texture to his understanding of who she'd been. How she'd moved through the world doing good without seeking recognition. Across the room, Victoria and Ryan stood frozen, clearly processing what they just learned. Daniel saw them exchange glances, saw Victoria's face pale as she began calculating. They'd thought he had some modest inheritance, maybe enough to reopen the bookstore with help. They hadn't understood the scale, the depth, the real truth of what he'd inherited. Daniel watched them watch him, saw the exact moment they realized they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Victoria's hand went to her throat, her expression shifting from social smile to shocked understanding. Ryan looked like he'd been punched, his face draining of color. Marcus Webb pulled Daniel aside. "There are some people I'd like you to meet, folks who knew your mother through her charitable work, board members of foundations she supported, people who can help you expand this model." For the next hour, Daniel was introduced to a network he hadn't known existed. His mother had been connected to numerous philanthropic efforts, had served quietly on boards and advisory committees, had been respected by people who understood the difference between wealth and worth. These people welcomed him warmly, offered support and resources, invited him to join the work his mother had been doing. It was overwhelming and affirming, a community of people committed to using resources responsibly. He noticed Victoria and Ryan trying to approach several times, but he was always engaged, always in conversation, always just slightly unavailable. He wasn't avoiding them, not exactly, just letting them marinate in their realization, letting them understand the magnitude of their mistake. Finally, around midnight, as the event was winding down, Victoria cornered him. Ryan stood beside her, both of them looking shell-shocked. "Daniel," Victoria said, her voice tight, "we need to talk." He nodded, leading them to his office in the back. It was small but nicely appointed, with a desk and chairs and photos of his mother on the walls. They sat, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Victoria broke first. "Why didn't you tell us?" Daniel looked at her calmly. "Tell you what?" "About the money, about your mother's estate. We thought—" She stopped, realizing how that sentence would sound. "You thought I had nothing," Daniel finished for her, "which is why you left, why you both treated me like a failure, like someone beneath you." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, man. That's not fair. We didn't know the situation." "No," Daniel agreed. "You didn't, but you made assumptions based on what you could see, and you treated me accordingly. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel noticed they seemed calculated, deployed strategically. "I made a mistake, Daniel, a huge mistake, but we can fix this. We can start over." "Start over?" Daniel kept his voice level. "Victoria, you left me while my mother was dying. You mocked my dreams, called me a failure, dismissed everything I valued. You didn't leave because I was poor. You left because you're someone who measures worth by bank accounts and status symbols. That hasn't changed." "But I love you," she said desperately. Ryan looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I love you, Daniel. I always have. I just got lost, got confused about what mattered. But seeing you tonight, seeing what you've built, it reminds me." "It reminds you that I'm worth your time now," Daniel interrupted, "because you think I have money. But Victoria, I'm the same person I was when you left. I had the same values, the same integrity, the same dreams. The only thing that's changed is your assessment of my utility." She flinched. "That's cruel." "No," Daniel said softly. "What's cruel is abandoning someone in their darkest moment because they can't give you the lifestyle you want. What's cruel is mocking someone for caring about meaningful work instead of profit. What's cruel is circling back once you think they have resources worth accessing." He turned to Ryan. "And you? You were supposed to be my best friend. We went through college together, stood up at each other's weddings, shared everything, and you stole my wife because you thought I was a failure who didn't deserve her, because in your world, relationships are just transactions, and I was a bad investment." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I didn't steal anyone. Victoria made her own choice." "You're right," Daniel agreed. "She did, and you made yours, and now you both get to live with those choices." Victoria stood, her tears gone, replaced by anger. "So what? You're just going to punish us forever? Hold this grudge because we weren't perfect? Everyone makes mistakes, Daniel. This isn't about punishment, Daniel said, standing as well. This is about understanding who people are when they think you have nothing to offer them. You both showed me exactly who you are. I believe you. And I'm choosing to move forward with people who valued me before they knew about any inheritance. Ryan stood too. So all this tonight, this was what? Some elaborate setup to humiliate us? No, Daniel said firmly. Tonight was about honoring my mother and continuing her work. You two made it about yourselves, like you make everything about yourselves. The world doesn't revolve around your ambitions and calculations. He walked to the door, opening it. I wish you both well. I genuinely do. Build your lives, find happiness, succeed in whatever ways matter to you. But do it without me. We're done here. Victoria tried one more approach. Daniel, please, let's just talk more. Think about this. I have thought about it, he said quietly. For months, I've thought about little else, and my mother, who understood people better than anyone I've known, warned me about exactly this scenario. She told me that people who value you at zero when you have nothing will never truly value you when you have something. They'll just value what they can get from you. She was right. He gestured toward the door. Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Ryan. I hope you find what you're looking for. They left slowly, Victoria looking back multiple times as if expecting him to change his mind. Ryan's expression was harder to read. Maybe shame, maybe anger, maybe just defeat. Daniel watched them go, feeling not triumph, but relief. A burden he'd been carrying since his mother's funeral finally lifted. He'd handled it exactly as she would have wanted, with dignity, honesty, and firm boundaries. He wasn't being cruel, he was being clear. Marcus Webb found him a few minutes later. You okay? Daniel nodded. Better than okay. I think I finally understand what my mother was teaching me, which was that integrity is its own reward, but it's also its own protection. She gave me wealth, yes, but more importantly, she gave me the character to use it well and the wisdom to recognize people who'd exploit it. Webb smiled. She'd be proud of how you handled that. I hope so, Daniel said. God, I hope so. The event wound down, the last guests departing with thanks and promises to return. Daniel locked up around 2 a.m, standing alone in the beautiful space he'd created. Tomorrow the bookstore would open for regular business, serving the community his mother had loved. The Restoration Fund would continue helping others. The Catherine Reeves Memorial Project would expand to more neighborhoods. His mother's invisible legacy would become visible, her values translated into action. And Victoria and Ryan would move on with their lives, having learned nothing or having learned everything, depending on their capacity for self-reflection. Daniel found he didn't care much either way. They were his past, a painful chapter now closed. The future lay ahead, full of purpose and possibility, built on the foundation his mother had so carefully prepared. He thought about her letter, about her wisdom, about everything she'd sacrificed to teach him these lessons. She'd hidden her wealth not from cruelty, but from love, wanting him to become someone who valued people over profit, meaning over money, character over credentials. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him, and he'd spend the rest of his life honoring it. As Daniel walked back to his hotel, he'd buy a proper apartment soon, but the hotel had become oddly comfortable. He felt his mother's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. I understand now, he whispered to the night air. I understand everything. Somewhere in the darkness, he imagined her smiling. The bookstore thrived in ways that surprised even Daniel. Within months, Pages and Poetry became a genuine community hub, exactly as he'd envisioned. The reading groups attracted dedicated members. The poetry slams drew crowds that spilled out onto the sidewalk. The community kitchen hosted classes that taught both cooking and food justice. Local schools partnered with them for literacy programs, and the space became known as a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of ability to pay. Daniel hired staff thoughtfully, people who loved books and believed in the mission, paying them well above market wages and offering benefits that made the jobs genuinely sustainable. Evelyn Torres volunteered 3 days a week, shelving books and chatting with customers, her presence adding warmth and continuity. The success was deeply satisfying, but Daniel knew it was just the beginning. With Marcus Webb's help, they'd identified locations in 4 other cities for similar projects. The Catherine Reeves Memorial Project was becoming real, a sustainable model for community-focused development that prioritized people over profit. They hired directors for each location, trained them in his mother's philosophy, and began the careful work of building something that would last beyond any individual. Whitfield helped Daniel establish a more formal foundation structure with a board and clear governance. They brought in people his mother had trusted, along with some of those she'd helped over the years. The foundation's mission was simple: invisible support for meaningful work that served communities rather than shareholders. It was exactly what Catherine Reeves had been doing privately, now scaled and systematized. Daniel found himself in meetings with major donors, philanthropists, and nonprofit leaders, all of whom were curious about this new foundation and its unusual approach. He spoke at conferences about his mother's philosophy, about dignity-preserving charity, about the difference between helping and controlling. Some people got it immediately, others looked at him like he was naive. He didn't mind either reaction. This work wasn't about converting everyone. It was about doing good where they could, how they could. About 6 months after the reopening, Daniel finally moved out of the hotel into a modest apartment in the neighborhood near the bookstore. It wasn't ostentatious, just a comfortable 2-bedroom with good light and a small office where he could work. He could have bought a mansion, could have moved to the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, but that felt wrong. His mother had lived simply despite vast wealth, and he understood why. Excessive luxury was distracting, isolating, a constant reminder of inequality that made it harder to connect with most people. He wanted to live in the community he served, to remain grounded in the reality most people inhabited. He furnished the apartment gradually, choosing pieces he actually liked rather than expensive statements. He learned to cook properly, something his mother had never taught him because she'd been too busy working. He adopted a dog from the shelter, a mutt named Charlie who'd been abandoned and needed a second chance. Life developed a rhythm that felt sustainable and meaningful. Mornings at the bookstore, afternoons in meetings about the foundation's work, evenings reading or walking Charlie, or occasionally having dinner with the friends he was making, people who knew nothing about his wealth, who liked him for who he was rather than what he had. It was a good life, the kind his mother had wanted for him. Victoria and Ryan had faded into the background of his life, their attempts at reconciliation gradually ceasing once they realized he was serious about moving on. He heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd gotten married in a lavish ceremony, that Ryan's career was flourishing, that they'd bought a weekend house in wine country. He felt nothing hearing these updates, no jealousy or satisfaction, just indifference. They were strangers now, people he'd known in another life. He wished them no ill, but he also had no interest in their world or their values. His mother had been right about everything, but especially about this. When you build your life on meaningful work and genuine relationships, the superficial concerns of status seekers simply cease to matter. Then about 8 months after the bookstore's reopening, Whitfield called with news. "I think it's time for you to see something your mother left." She called it the final instruction, meant to be shared once you'd established yourself, once you'd found your footing. They met at Whitfield's office, and the lawyer handed him a flash drive. "Your mother made a video," Whitfield explained. "She recorded it about 6 months before she died, when she knew she didn't have much time left. She wanted to speak to you directly about the next phase." Daniel took the flash drive home, waiting until evening to watch it. He set up his laptop on the kitchen table, poured a glass of whiskey, and pressed play. His mother's face filled the screen, thinner than he remembered, but smiling. "Hello, my darling boy," she began, and Daniel's eyes immediately filled with tears. "If you're watching this, it means several things. It means I'm gone, which I hope wasn't too hard on you. It means you've learned about your inheritance and have had time to process it. And it means you've begun doing the work I hoped you would, using resources to help others, building community, staying true to your values despite having money that could corrupt them. Thomas tells me you're doing beautifully, that you've opened the bookstore better than before, that you're expanding the model, that you're honoring my memory in ways that make me indescribably proud." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But now comes the harder part, Daniel. Now that you've learned to use wealth wisely, now that you've developed systems and structures, now that you understand the responsibility of resources, I need to tell you about the full extent of what you've inherited. She took a breath. The 300 million Thomas told you about? That's real, but it's not everything. There are additional holdings, additional resources I kept even more secret because they required even more responsibility. Your father wasn't just an heir to a manufacturing empire. He was one of the wealthiest people in the country. When his family paid me off, they vastly underestimated what I'd do with that money. They thought I'd spend it on cars and clothes and frivolous things. Instead, I invested brilliantly and built something they never saw coming. Over 30 years, I've accumulated wealth approaching $2 billion. Daniel's whiskey glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. He barely noticed. His mother continued, I didn't tell you this initially because you needed to learn with smaller stakes first. You needed to make mistakes, develop judgment, understand the weight of wealth before you were trusted with this much. But now you're ready, I think. Now you understand that money is just a tool, that character determines how that tool gets used. The question is, what will you do with these resources? I'll tell you what I hope, though you're free to choose differently. I hope you'll expand the work we've started together, the work you're already doing. I hope you'll fund research into diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignore because they're not profitable enough. I hope you'll support artists and writers and thinkers who challenge conventional wisdom. I hope you'll buy buildings in gentrifying neighborhoods and keep rents affordable so communities don't get displaced. I hope you'll use this money to fight back against the forces that see people as commodities, that value profit over humanity, that would rather let people suffer than sacrifice quarterly earnings. Her eyes grew fierce. Your father's family represents everything I despise about wealth. They're cruel, selfish people who've used their money to hurt rather than help, to dominate rather than serve. They paid me off not just to disappear, but because they genuinely believed I was worthless, that you were worthless, that anyone without their pedigree was beneath consideration. I've built this fortune in part to prove them wrong, to demonstrate that character matters more than bloodline, that how you use wealth matters more than how you acquire it. But here's the thing, Daniel. They don't know you exist. They paid me to keep you secret, and I have. They think I took their money and disappeared, and they never bothered to check. Your father is dead now, died 10 years ago, and his family still controls massive wealth and influence. You're his only child, which means you have a legal claim to that estate, though they don't know it. I've left you all the documentation, all the proof of paternity, everything you'd need to challenge their control. She leaned closer to the camera. But I don't want you to do that, Daniel. I don't want you pursuing that family's wealth or recognition. Not because you don't deserve it, you do, but because they'd corrupt you. They'd pull you into legal battles that would consume years of your life. They'd force you into their world of cruelty and calculation. And in fighting them, you'd become like them, focused on revenge and recognition rather than meaningful work. So here's what I'm asking. Take the resources I've given you, ignore the resources they have, and build the life I know you're capable of building. Let them keep their money and their emptiness. You have enough to do incredible good, and that's what matters. She smiled then, that familiar warm smile. I know I've asked a lot of you, keeping all this secret, living modestly when you could live lavishly, choosing difficult, meaningful work over easy comfort. But I also know you're capable of it because you're my son, because I raised you to value what matters. Be generous, Daniel, but be wise. Help people, but protect yourself. Build things that last, that serve communities, that make the world measurably better. And don't let money change who you are at your core. Someone who reads to kids at the library, who remembers customers' names, who believes people deserve dignity regardless of their economic status. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes glistening. I love you more than you'll ever fully understand. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all this in person. Sorry I had to hide so much. But I trust you completely with this responsibility. You're going to do extraordinary things, my beautiful boy. I know it. Make me proud. You already have, but keep making me proud every day. The video ended. Daniel sat in stunned silence, glass shards around his feet, his mind reeling. $2 billion. His mother had accumulated $2 billion and kept it even more secret than the first fortune. And she'd chosen not to pursue his father's family's wealth on top of that. Chosen to build independently rather than fight for what might be legally his. He understood her reasoning. Those battles would have consumed everything, would have pulled her into a world of people she despised. But still, the magnitude of it was overwhelming. He cleaned up the broken glass automatically, his hands shaking. Then he called Whitfield. "Did you know?" he asked when the lawyer answered. "About all of it?" "Yes," Whitfield said gently. "Your mother told me everything. She wanted me to know so I could help you when the time came. Are you all right?" "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. It's too much. Your mother thought you were ready. She thought you'd proven yourself capable of handling wealth without letting it corrupt you. She was very deliberate about the timing." They talked for an hour, Whitfield explaining the structures Catherine had set up, the trusts and foundations and investment vehicles that controlled nearly $2 billion in assets. It was sophisticated and complex, built over decades with extraordinary skill. His mother hadn't just been smart, she'd been brilliant, a financial mind who'd outperformed most professional investors while maintaining complete anonymity. "What do I do with it?" Daniel asked finally. "What she asked you to do," Whitfield said. "Use it to make the world better. Expand the projects you've started, launch new ones, find ways to help people that only someone with these resources can do. Your mother gave you both the means and the mission. The rest is up to you." After they hung up, Daniel sat in his apartment for hours thinking. His mother had given him an extraordinary gift, but also an extraordinary burden. $2 billion could accomplish tremendous good or tremendous harm, depending on how it was deployed. It could feed thousands, house countless families, fund research that saved lives. Or it could corrupt him, isolate him, turn him into exactly the kind of person his mother had warned against. He thought about Victoria and Ryan, about people who measured worth by bank accounts, who saw others as means to ends. With this much money, he'd attract that type of person constantly, an endless parade of users and takers. He'd need to be vigilant, careful, protected, but he'd also need to remain open, generous, willing to trust and help. It was a difficult balance, and his mother had managed it perfectly. He needed to learn how. That night, Daniel barely slept. He kept thinking about the video, about his mother's face, about her words. She'd trusted him completely with this responsibility, had believed he was strong enough and good enough to handle it. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't let her down. Whatever came next, he'd face it with the integrity she'd spent his whole life cultivating, and he'd make her proud every day in every decision, just as she'd asked. The next phase of Daniel's life unfolded with deliberate care. With Whitfield's help, he restructured the foundation to accommodate the larger reality of his resources. The Catherine Reeves Memorial Foundation now had capital to accomplish things at genuine scale, not just supporting individual bookstores, but funding entire literacy initiatives. Not just helping one family with medical bills, but researching treatments for neglected diseases. Not just preserving one community, but developing models for sustainable, affordable housing that could be replicated nationally. It was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. Daniel assembled a team carefully. He promoted several people who'd been working on the bookstore project, people who'd proven they shared his values and could execute complex plans. He hired nonprofit veterans who brought expertise he lacked. He brought in researchers, policy experts, and community organizers. The foundation's staff grew to 50 people, all working on different aspects of his mother's vision. Weekly meetings covered everything from grant applications to real estate acquisitions to impact assessments. Daniel learned constantly, absorbing information about sectors he'd never thought about, challenges he'd never imagined. It was exhausting and fulfilling. Marcus Webb became not just a partner, but a genuine friend, someone Daniel could trust completely. Webb had his own wealth and demanded nothing from Daniel except collaboration on meaningful work. They spent long evenings talking about philosophy and strategy, about the responsibility of resources in an unequal world. Webb introduced Daniel to other people in similar situations. heirs and entrepreneurs and investors who decided to use wealth for good rather than just accumulation. This informal network became invaluable. A community of people navigating similar challenges and sharing lessons learned. Daniel realized his mother must have had something similar, a quiet network of people committed to invisible philanthropy. He began reaching out to them. One of his mother's letters had included a list, names and contact information for people she'd helped over the years who might be willing to talk to him. There were dozens of names spanning decades of her quiet generosity. Daniel began calling them, introducing himself, explaining that he was continuing her work. The conversations were remarkable. A Nobel laureate whose early research had been funded by an anonymous grant from Catherine Reeves, a civil rights lawyer whose legal clinic was kept afloat by her contributions during lean years. A teacher who'd received a scholarship that changed the trajectory of his life. A family-run restaurant saved from closure by a mysterious investor who asked nothing in return. One by one, they shared their stories, their gratitude, their memories of trying to thank his mother and being gently deflected. She said the help wasn't about her, one woman told Daniel. She said she was just passing along what others had given her, keeping a cycle going. I've tried to do the same thing in my own way, helping others when I can. Your mother taught me that wealth is just a tool, and the question is what you build with it. These conversations changed something in Daniel. He'd been thinking of the foundation's work as his responsibility, his burden to carry. But hearing these stories, understanding the ripple effects of his mother's generosity, he realized it wasn't a burden at all. It was a privilege, an opportunity to touch lives in ways most people never could. And more than that, it was a chance to build something larger than himself, a network of people committed to making the world measurably better. He organized a gathering, inviting everyone on his mother's list who could attend. They met at a rented event space, about 40 people ranging from their 30s to their 80s, from all walks of life. Daniel stood before them nervously and spoke. Thank you all for coming. My mother, Catherine Reeves, helped each of you at crucial moments in your lives. She did it anonymously, asking nothing in return, because she believed that's how generosity should work. I'm her son, and I'm trying to continue what she started, but I realize now I can't do it alone. I need your help. Not your money, not your resources, but your wisdom and experience. You've all been on the receiving end of invisible philanthropy. You understand what it means, how it feels, what makes it effective. I want to learn from you. What followed was an extraordinary conversation that lasted hours. People shared stories about how my mother's help had arrived at exactly the right moment, often in ways that preserved their dignity and agency. They talked about what good philanthropy looked like versus bad philanthropy, about the difference between helping and controlling, about how to give without creating dependency or resentment. They challenged some of Daniel's assumptions, pushed him to think bigger and more creatively, offered to help in various ways. By the end of the evening, they'd formed an informal advisory network, agreeing to meet quarterly to discuss the foundation's work and suggest new directions. It was exactly what he needed. Wise voices who understood both the potential and the pitfalls of wealth-driven change. Marcus Webb pulled him aside as people were leaving. Your mother was a genius, Webb said. She didn't just give people money, she invested in them emotionally, created relationships that would outlast her. This network you've just formalized, it's incredibly valuable, more valuable than any amount of capital. These people will tell you the truth, will challenge you, will keep you grounded. Don't lose this. Daniel nodded, understanding completely. Over the next months, the foundation's work expanded dramatically. They launched a national affordable housing initiative, buying apartment buildings in gentrifying neighborhoods and placing them in community land trusts that would keep rents affordable permanently. They funded a medical research consortium focused on neglected tropical diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored because the patient populations were poor. They established writing fellowships for authors from underrepresented backgrounds, providing them with both financial support and mentorship. They created a small business rescue fund that helped independent bookstores, theaters, restaurants, and other community-serving businesses stay afloat against corporate competition. Each initiative was carefully designed to address real needs without creating problematic dependencies, to empower rather than control, to preserve dignity while providing support. The work was deeply satisfying, but Daniel remained careful about his public profile. Most of the foundation's grants and investments were made anonymously or through intermediary organizations. He gave occasional interviews about the Catherine Reeves Memorial Project's bookstore initiative, but he never discussed his personal wealth or the full scope of the foundation's work. He lived in his modest apartment, drove a normal car, dressed simply. To most people, he was just a nonprofit director, someone doing good work but not anyone particularly special. This anonymity was crucial for maintaining the kind of life he wanted to live. A few people in his life knew the truth. Whitfield, Webb, his closest foundation colleagues, the members of his mother's network, but they were all people who'd proven trustworthy, who understood the importance of discretion. Everyone else saw him as modestly successful, someone who'd recovered from early struggles to build something meaningful. It was exactly the image he wanted to project. Close enough to truth that it didn't feel like deception, but vague enough to avoid attracting the wrong kind of attention. About a year after the bookstore's reopening, Daniel's life had found a sustainable rhythm. The foundation was thriving, the various initiatives were producing measurable results, and he'd built a life that honored his mother's values while remaining manageable and meaningful. He was happy as he'd been since before his mother's death. And then Victoria and Ryan resurfaced, more aggressively than before. It started with a phone call from Ryan, his voice carrying a forced casualness that immediately put Daniel on alert. "Hey man, I know we've been out of touch, but I heard some interesting things about your foundation. Sounds like you're doing really well, bigger scale than I realized. I'd love to grab coffee and hear about it." Daniel agreed to meet, curious about what they wanted. They met at a cafe downtown, and Ryan arrived looking slightly desperate despite his expensive clothes. "Look, I'll be direct," Ryan said once they'd ordered. "Victoria and I are going through a rough patch financially. Made some bad investments, overextended ourselves on the house and the vacation property. We're not in trouble exactly, but things are tight, and I remember you saying the foundation sometimes helps small businesses. I'm thinking about starting a consulting firm. Wondered if there might be funding available for that kind of thing." The audacity was breathtaking. Daniel kept his expression neutral. "The foundation focuses on community-serving nonprofits and businesses. I'm not sure a consulting firm would qualify." Ryan leaned forward. "Come on, man. We're friends or we were. And you've clearly got resources now, more than anyone realized. Victoria and I, we made mistakes. We admit that. But we're not asking for charity, just an investment opportunity. We'd pay you back, with interest." "The foundation doesn't make personal loans," Daniel said carefully. "Everything goes through a formal application process with a review board. I don't have authority to just give money to friends." It wasn't entirely true. As the foundation's sole benefactor and board chair, he could technically do whatever he wanted, but he wasn't about to explain that to Ryan. Ryan's jaw tightened. "So that's how it is? You get money and suddenly you're too good for the people who knew you before?" Daniel finished his coffee standing. "I'm not too good for anyone, Ryan, but I also learned something important about who values me for me versus who values me for what I can provide. You've made your assessment pretty clear twice now. Once when you decided I wasn't worth your friendship or loyalty, and again just now when you decided I might be useful again. I'm not interested in being useful to you." He walked out, leaving Ryan staring after him angrily. Later that week, Victoria called. Her approach was different, more emotional. "Daniel, please, can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important." They met at the park where Daniel had sat after learning about his inheritance, the same benches where he'd processed his mother's death and his life's transformation. Victoria looked stressed, her usual polish slightly frayed. "I made a huge mistake," she began. "Not just leaving you, but everything after. Ryan's not who I thought he was. He's controlling and dismissive, and I realize now I gave up something real for something fake. I want to fix this, Daniel. I want us to fix this." Daniel listened quietly. Victoria continued, tears starting to flow. "I've been following your work, reading about the foundation. You're doing exactly what you always talked about, making a real difference. And I'm trapped in this life I thought I wanted, with someone who treats me like an accessory. I made such a terrible mistake. I'm sorry you're unhappy, Daniel said sincerely. I genuinely am. But Victoria, we're not getting back together. Her tears stopped abruptly, replaced by something harder. Why not? We were good together once. We could be good again. We were never actually good together, Daniel said gently. I loved who I thought you were, and you tolerated who I was while hoping I'd change into someone more impressive. When I didn't change fast enough, you left. Now you think I have changed, that I've become successful and worth your time. But I'm actually exactly the same person I always was. I just have money now. That's the only difference. Victoria's expression shifted, calculation replacing emotion. That's not true. You're different now, more confident, more established. I'm exactly the same, Daniel repeated. I care about the same things, value the same things, want the same kind of life. The only thing that's changed is your perception of my worth, and that tells me everything I need to know. You didn't leave me because we were incompatible. You left because you thought I was worthless. Now you think I'm worth something? But that's not love, Victoria. That's opportunism. She stood, anger flashing across her face. You're being incredibly self-righteous, you know that? People make mistakes. People grow and change their minds. But you're so obsessed with being the martyr, the noble victim, that you can't even consider forgiveness. Daniel stood as well, meeting her eyes calmly. This isn't about being a martyr. It's about understanding who people are when the stakes are low. You and Ryan both showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had nothing. You were cruel, dismissive, contemptuous. Now you're back because you think I have something you want. But I don't owe you access to my resources or my life just because you've changed your assessment of my value. Victoria's face twisted. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? You've got your little foundation and your moral superiority, and you look down on everyone who actually wants to succeed in life. Your mother raised you to be a sanctimonious loser, and apparently that worked perfectly. The insult to his mother cut deep, but Daniel kept his voice level. My mother raised me to value character over credentials, people over profit, meaning over money. If that makes me a loser in your eyes, then I'm grateful to be exactly that kind of loser. Goodbye, Victoria. He walked away, hearing her call after him, her voice shifting from anger to pleading and back again. He didn't look back. When he reached his car, his hands were shaking, not from hurt, but from something closer to relief. This was the final test, the last chance for either of them to prove they'd learned anything, grown in any way. They'd failed completely, revealing themselves to be exactly who his mother had warned him about. People who measured relationships by utility, who saw others as resources to exploit. That evening, Daniel called Whitfield. I need to finalize the divorce paperwork. Make sure Victoria gets exactly what she's entitled to under the original terms, which is nothing from my inheritance since we were already separated when I learned about it. And make sure Ryan's business consulting firm never accidentally gets any foundation funding. I want clean separation from both of them. Permanently. Whitfield assured him it would be handled. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this, the lawyer said. She predicted they'd come back, and she predicted you'd have the strength to turn them away. She was right about everything, Daniel said quietly. Absolutely everything. Over the next few weeks, Daniel received increasingly desperate messages from both Victoria and Ryan. Victoria swung wildly between apologies and accusations, pleading for another chance, and then attacking him for his cruelty. Ryan's were more calculated, trying different approaches, friendship, business opportunity, even veiled threats about exposing his wealth publicly. Daniel blocked both their numbers eventually, instructing his assistant to screen any communication from them. He didn't want revenge, didn't want to hurt them, but he also didn't want them in his life. The divorce was finalized quietly, Victoria receiving nothing from his inheritance as per the prenuptial agreement she'd insisted on when they married. An irony that still made him shake his head. She'd wanted to protect her own assets, never imagining he might one day have assets worth protecting. The foundation's work continued to expand. They opened 3 more community centers modeled on the bookstore, each one becoming a beloved neighborhood hub within months. The affordable housing initiative was growing, preserving thousands of units that would otherwise have been lost to gentrification. The Medical Research Consortium announced its first major breakthrough, a treatment protocol for a parasitic disease that affected millions in developing countries, but had been ignored because patients couldn't afford expensive medications. It was exactly the kind of impact Daniel had dreamed about, exactly what his mother had envisioned. One afternoon, Whitfield called with news. "There's something your mother wanted me to share with you at this point." She left another letter, marked "when he's found his footing." Daniel went to Whitfield's office that evening. The lawyer handed him an envelope, this one thicker than the others. Inside were several pages in his mother's handwriting, dated just weeks before her death. "My dearest Daniel," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've survived the worst period, my death, the betrayals, the revelation of wealth, the temptations and tests that come with resources. Thomas tells me you've handled everything beautifully, that you've stayed true to yourself, that you're doing the work I hoped you'd do. I'm so proud I could burst, even from wherever I am now. But there's something else I need to tell you, something I've kept from everyone, even Thomas until very recently. It's about your father and his family, about the choice I made 30 years ago, and why I made it the way I did. I told you in the video that your father was an heir to a manufacturing empire, that his family paid me off to disappear. All of that is true. What I didn't tell you is that shortly after you were born, they sent lawyers with another offer. They wanted you. They offered me $50 million to surrender parental rights completely, to let them raise you as a legitimate heir, to give you access to the family name and fortune. $50 million to give you up. I refused immediately. I didn't even consider it, not for a second, because I knew what they were, Daniel. I'd seen how they treated people they considered beneath them, how they measured worth by bloodline and bank accounts, how they'd raised your father to be cruel and entitled. They would have given you wealth, yes, and status and power, but they would have destroyed everything good in you, would have turned you into someone who valued position over people, someone who used others rather than helping them. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them have you, so I took their original $2 million, invested it brilliantly, and built a fortune that rivaled theirs, not to compete with them, but to prove that character matters more than pedigree, that how you use wealth matters more than how you acquire it. I wanted to show them, even though they'd never know, that the woman they dismissed as worthless had more financial acumen and moral sense than their entire dynasty. And more importantly, I wanted to raise you myself, to give you values that would make you genuinely good rather than just rich. Your father's family still doesn't know you exist. They think I took their initial payment and disappeared, and they never bothered to check. Your father died without legitimate heirs, which means his estate was divided among his siblings and their children. You have a legal claim to a portion of that estate, probably several $100 million at this point. I have all the documentation proving paternity, all the evidence you'd need to challenge the distribution. But Daniel, my darling boy, I don't want you to do that. I want you to let them keep their money and their ignorance. Here's why. Pursuing that claim would pull you into years of legal battles with people who are fundamentally cruel. They'd investigate every aspect of your life, would try to discredit you and me, would make the process as painful as possible. They'd force you to spend time and energy on something purely vindictive rather than constructive. And even if you won, even if you got hundreds of millions more than you already have, what would it accomplish? You already have enough resources to do tremendous good. More money wouldn't let you do more good. It would just distract you from the good you're already doing. I'm telling you this not because I think you should pursue the claim, but because I want you to understand the choice I made. I chose you over money, dignity over status, character over pedigree, and I'd make the same choice 1,000 times. You are worth more than all their wealth combined, not because of anything you'll accomplish or create, but because of who you are. Kind, thoughtful, generous, someone who sees value in every person, regardless of their station. That's the legacy I wanted to leave. Not billions of dollars, but a son who makes the world measurably better just by being in it. So here's my final instruction, my last piece of advice. Let them go. Don't pursue your father's estate. Don't seek recognition from his family. Don't waste even a moment of your precious life on people who would have destroyed you if given the chance. You have everything you need, resources to do good, values to guide you, and a life that matters in ways money can't measure. That's my real inheritance to you, freedom from needing anything from people who don't deserve you. I love you more than language can express. Live well, do good, stay true, and remember that the greatest revenge isn't taking what they have, it's being happy without needing it. Make me proud every day. You already have. Your mother, always and forever. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His mother had turned down $50 million, a fortune at that time, to keep him, to raise him herself, to protect him from people who would have corrupted everything good in him. She'd chosen him over wealth, over ease, over status, and she'd built a fortune anyway, through her own brilliance and determination, proving that she was worth 100 of his father's family. The revelation was overwhelming. All his life, he'd believed he was the son of some random man who'd abandoned them. The truth was so much more complex. His father had been wealthy and connected. His family had wanted him, and his mother had fought to keep him by building something greater than what they'd offered. She'd outplayed them completely, and they never even knew the game had been played. Whitfield watched him process the information. She was adamant that you not pursue the paternal estate, the lawyer said gently. She made me promise to advise against it, but legally, you do have a claim if you ever choose to exercise it. Daniel shook his head firmly. No, she was right about everything else. She's right about this too. I don't need their money, don't want their recognition, don't want anything to do with people who tried to buy me like property. Let them keep their fortune and their ignorance. I have everything I need. Your mother predicted you'd say exactly that, Whitfield said with a slight smile. She said you'd choose meaning over money every time because that's who she raised you to be. Daniel folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. Another piece of his mother's wisdom, another gift from beyond the grave. She'd been preparing him for this moment his entire life, teaching him that worth came from character rather than credentials, that relationships mattered more than resources, that living well was the best revenge against people who tried to diminish you. He thought about Victoria and Ryan, about his father's family, about all the people who'd underestimated him or dismissed him or tried to use him. They'd all revealed themselves clearly, and he'd learned to see them for who they were. And now, with his mother's final instruction, he could finally close the door on all of them completely. No anger, no bitterness, no need for vindication, just clarity and peace. Thank you for everything, Daniel said to Whitfield, for honoring my mother's wishes, for guiding me through all of this, for being someone I can trust completely. Whitfield nodded. It's been an honor. Your mother was extraordinary, and you're continuing her legacy beautifully. She'd be so proud. Daniel left the office and walked through the city as dusk was falling. The streets were busy with people heading home from work, the city's rhythm steady and familiar. He thought about his mother walking these same streets years ago, pregnant with him, having just turned down $50 million to keep him, determined to build something better than what his father's family offered. The courage that took, the faith in herself and in him, was staggering. He pulled out his phone and looked at photos of her, images from throughout his life. His mother young and smiling, holding him as a baby. His mother at his high school graduation, beaming with pride. His mother at the bookstore's original opening, her arm around his shoulders, both of them hopeful about the future. She'd given him everything that mattered: love, values, purpose, and eventually resources to amplify those values. She'd been the best mother anyone could hope for, and he'd spend the rest of his life trying to honor her memory. As Daniel walked back toward his apartment, where Charlie would be waiting, where his modest but comfortable life continued, he felt something he hadn't felt in over a year: complete peace. The grief was still there. He'd always miss his mother, but the sharp edges had softened. In their place was gratitude, clarity, and a profound sense of purpose. He knew who he was, what he valued, and what he wanted to build with the resources and time he'd been given. The vultures had circled and been turned away. The betrayers had revealed themselves and been released. The truth about his origins had been shared and accepted. Now came the real work, the meaningful work, the work his mother had prepared him for his entire life. And he was ready. More than ready, he was grateful for the opportunity, humbled by the responsibility, and determined to make every day count in ways that honored her memory. Tomorrow he'd return to the foundation, to the staff and projects and communities counting on their work. He'd continue building spaces where people mattered, where dignity was preserved, where resources served need rather than greed. He'd expand the network his mother had started, help more people the way she'd helped so many. He'd live simply despite vast wealth, stay grounded despite increasing influence, remain kind despite knowing how cruel the world could be. He'd make her proud. Every single day, in every single decision, he'd make her proud. Not because he owed her, though he owed her everything, but because she'd shown him the best way to live. And that legacy, that gift of character and purpose and values, was worth more than all the money in the world. Daniel smiled, looking up at the darkening sky, imagining his mother somewhere watching, knowing she could see him clearly now, in ways she never could when she was alive. "I understand," he whispered. "I finally understand everything, and I'm going to make you so proud." Somewhere in the universe, he felt certain she was smiling back.